Welcome back on this wonderful Wednesday. Is that too much alliteration for you? I'll stop, only if you stick around. I'm Major Scott, and this is English Language Arts, 6th grade. Let's get started. We're going to continue this week with Compare and Contrast. This is day 3, and today we will compare and contrast two texts on the same topic or theme. It's the same every day this week. Today, you'll need the same materials, a pen or pencil, and lined paper or the printed materials. I really recommend that you have the printed materials today if you can get them. It's so much more helpful to have today's lesson printed. On the agenda, we're going to check yesterday's work, look at 2 descriptions of a cell, and that will set you up for your independent practice. So take a minute and get out yesterday's work so we can check that now. So if you've looked at the attachment in this module, I've attached first the answers from yesterday's work, the first and second pages. Below that, the third and fourth pages are what I would recommend that you print out for today's material. That is also today's independent practice, all in one document. So let's look at the first page and check our answer. After the Born to Fly text, you were to answer explaining the author's purpose, finding evidence from the text to support your answer. A lot of answers could have been correct as long as you explain the author's purpose and provided textual support as evidence. If you look on the left-hand side, they give a sample response. The author writes to inform readers about Earhart's early career and how she decided she wanted to be a pilot. For example, the text mentions her first flight with Frank Cox and how she took flying lessons 5 days later. Their first sentence answers the first part of the question, explain the author's purpose. Their second sentence gives evidence from the text to support that answer. They use her mentioning the first flight with Frank and taking flying lessons 5 days later. Yours doesn't have to be in 2 separate sentences. It can be all in one, or it can be in more than 2 sentences, as long as you have the author's purpose and evidence from the text that supports that answer. If you scroll down to the second page, where you read Earhart on equality, the Venn diagram is completed. Yours might look similar. It could also look a little bit different and still be correct. So let's review some of the answers they gave. Both texts, Earhart on equality and Born to Fly, discuss a female aviator. They discuss how she's fearless and set records. However, Born to Fly discusses the first airplane ride in 1920, taking flying lessons 5 days later, and female altitude record. That is not mentioned in the other text. Earhart on equality mentions first woman to fly across the Atlantic, encouraged women to fly and be scientists, and said women must try the same things as men. Again, those are differences only mentioned in Earhart on equality and not in Born to Fly. Hopefully, your answers look similar. Lastly, you were to write 2 paragraphs comparing and contrasting the information provided in both biographies. Hopefully, you just use the information you pulled in your Venn diagram because you already did the work. You found the evidence and noted those differences and similarities, and now you can turn that into 2 paragraphs. Your paragraphs can be set up any way you would like. Similarities first and then differences. Differences first and then similarities. Those would provide more clarity and differentiate for the reader which paragraph discusses which. Or maybe you mixed it together and just used a lot of descriptive words stating similar but different to make it clear for your reader. I'll make sure to check my email to see if any of you sent me any work from yesterday or the day before. I know I've gotten a few already that I really enjoyed looking at, and I'm sure I'll get more this week. Thanks. Now that we've checked yesterday's work, we're going to move on to 2 descriptions of a cell. But before we do that, I'd like to look at some vocabulary. We have the same recurring vocabulary on the left side: author, author's purpose, and the author's message. By now, you should know what all of those are and be able to tell them off the top of your head. On the right-hand side are some new or maybe just reviewed vocabulary terms. Can you think of what the difference between fiction and nonfiction is? I like to think of fiction as fake and nonfiction as not fake. That's the easiest way that I remember it, but others remember it different ways. Nonfiction is real, fiction is not real. Whatever's easiest for you. If you get confused, I recommend figuring out like a little cheat code that works for you, a way for you to remember it. The next term, literary, refers to anything that is written creatively as far as literature, anything written. The fourth term, scientific, can describe anything that has to do with science or related to science. Actually both of the texts that we're reading today will be scientific texts, and they will also be nonfiction, not fake or real. Scientific texts in particular, as well as any specialized text, include specialized vocabulary. That's vocabulary that's specific to a trait or a job or a thing. If you were a car mechanic, you would have specialized vocabulary, maybe the word brake or rotor, hubcap. Those words are specialized or specific to that job or trade or cars. You probably wouldn't hear those words in a different job. Next, we have word choice. That's specifically selecting words over others. I always tell my students with word choice, there's a difference between saying an old person and the elderly. They're both the same thing, someone who is later in their years, but one has a different sound or feel to it. If I say old person, it's a little more negative in connotation. If I say elderly, it's a little bit more positive in connotation or more respectful. So word choice can select words for connotation or how they sound or feel, and it can also select them for other reasons. Word choice and vocabulary, all of these kind of lend to the author's style or the way that they write, and we'll look more into that today. If you have the printed document out today, you should get that out now and go to the third page. We're going to be looking at the third and fourth pages for the remainder of the video. On the third page, it should say something similar to this, two descriptions of a cell at the top. So these are the two texts that we'll be looking at today. One is from a book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It's a really great book, if you've heard of it, maybe. And the second text is actually from Britannica Kids, and it's titled Cell. It's just a snippet of an article on a cell. All right, let's look at these directions. Both excerpts or texts are nonfiction. What does nonfiction mean again? Correct. It is not fake. It is real. So both of these are written about something that's real. None of it is fake. Both contain similar vocabulary. So you'll see words from both that are the same. One contains more literary elements. So literary elements are more creative, maybe more descriptive, figurative language, or literary devices. Those are literary elements. You can also have plot from week 1. I know you guys all reviewed narrative structure or plot. Those are also literary elements. While the other contains more specialized vocabulary, the term that we just talked about. Specialized vocabulary are words that you wouldn't necessarily hear outside of that field or in discussion of that topic. And scientific descriptions. As you read, note words, phrases, or sentences that seem literary. So these are going to seem more creative, maybe more descriptive, maybe figurative language. Maybe you'll see characters or rising action, some conflict, anything literary. Words and phrases that seem scientific. So this is why I recommended that you print this document out today, because if you can write all over it, mark things up, it'll really help you see it, or at least it helps me see it. If you can't print it out, or if you don't have it printed out, maybe start 2 columns on a piece of paper, noting these things on one side from The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and on the other side, noting these things from CEL. So you'll just be writing those out rather than highlighting or underlining. So let's first read the excerpt on the left from The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. As I read, I want you to highlight, mark, underline, or write down any literary elements or scientific descriptions, elements, vocabulary, okay? Under the microscope, a cell looks a lot like a fried egg. It has a white, the cytoplasm, that's full of water and proteins to keep it fed, and a yolk, the nucleus, that holds all the genetic information that makes you, you. The cytoplasm buzzes like a New York City street. It's crammed full of molecules and vessels, endlessly shuttling enzymes and sugars from one part of the cell to another, pumping water, nutrients, and oxygen in and out of the cell. All the while, little cytoplasmic factories work 24/7, cranking out sugars, fats, proteins, and energy to keep the whole thing running and feed the nucleus. The nucleus is the brains of the operation. Inside every nucleus within each cell of your body, there's an identical copy of your entire genome. That genome tells cells when to grow and divide and make sure they do their jobs, whether that's controlling your heartbeat or helping your brain understand the words on this page. I put the MLA citation underneath unless any of you want to check it out. And I'd like you now to hit the pause button on the video and really make sure that on your paper you have marked, highlighted, or underlined, or maybe written your own list on your own lined paper of those vocabulary, literary elements, specialized vocabulary, and or scientific descriptions from the first excerpt. Go ahead and hit pause now. Let's read the second text, excerpt from CEL out of Britannica Kids. As I read this aloud, I want you to do the same thing. Mark, highlight, underline, or write down on your lined paper similar vocabulary, note any literary elements, specialized vocabulary, or just scientific descriptions. They're describing things that sound just really scientific, not how you or I would say it normally in a day-to-day. Most cells have 3 main parts: the cell membrane, the cytoplasm, and the nucleus. The cell membrane is like the skin of the cell. The cytoplasm performs many functions to keep the cell alive. The nucleus can be thought of as the cell's brain. Cell membrane. The cell membrane is a thin but tough wall surrounding the cell. It allows useful substances to enter the cell, but it blocks the entry of harmful substances. The membrane also forces out waste products. Cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is composed mainly of water, with some solids. Most of the cell's constant work of keeping alive is performed in the cytoplasm. Special structures called organelles within the cytoplasm perform specific functions. For example, some organelles make important substances called proteins. Cells use proteins in most of their chemical processes. Other organelles change food molecules into material needed for energy and growth. A network of tubes transports material within the cell. Nucleus. The nucleus is one of the organelles in a cell. It is located near the center of the cell. It acts as the control center of the cell. It regulates the cell's growth and reproduction. The nucleus contains structures called chromosomes. Chromosomes contain the cell's genes, which determine the characteristics of the cell. When the cell makes copies of itself, the genes pass on the cell's traits to the new cells. And again, I cited it in MLA format. If you want to go find it, you can log in through Clever and access Britannica Kids, or the Britannica school version where this whole article came from. This is just a piece. So I'd like you to take another minute or so now to hit the pause button and really make sure that you've noted similar vocabulary in the second text, any literary elements you might see, maybe figurative language, or just sounds like they wrote that sentence creatively. Specialized vocabulary and scientific description. Go ahead and hit pause now. All right. I know that I made you pause twice already, but for a third time, I'd like you to go through taking both texts into account and note what vocabulary is similar in both. You might have missed this, especially in the first text, because you hadn't read the second text yet. So you wouldn't know if the word cell in the first text was similar vocabulary to the word cell in the second text, but it is. So go ahead and for a last time, I promise, hit pause and note across text similar vocabulary, any literary elements, those aren't going to be the same across text, but just double check and make sure you've gotten them from both. Specialized vocabulary, if you can find that in each, and scientific descriptions, again, if you can find those in each. All right, today is a quick one. We're almost done. We've checked yesterday's work. We looked at 2 descriptions of a cell, and now it's time for your independent practice. Let me explain. If you scroll down to the last page of the shared document, or page 4, you'll find another Venn diagram and the directions for your independent practice. If you did the work up top and followed those directions, you should have marked or written a lot of the things that you'll need to be looking at below and just filling those into the Venn diagrams. So let's read these directions. For independent work, you are to find similarities and differences between the 2 excerpts or texts. Use these questions as a starting point. Be sure to go back to the text and find evidence in each before completing the Venn diagram. And you can use that evidence in your Venn diagram. So here are the questions that you'll answer, and these answers will fall into the center or similarity section of the Venn diagram, or maybe you'll have an answer for each on the side because it's a difference, and you can note how it's different in each. What type of text is each piece? What genre, or what do you know about each piece? Maybe they're the same, maybe they're different. What is the topic the author is writing about? Maybe it's the same, maybe it's different. Why did each author write the text, or what is the author's purpose? Make sure that you're using evidence from the text while answering these questions and putting it into its proper place on the Venn diagram. Question 4, what message or idea is the author trying to convey? What is the author's message in each, or maybe it's the same? How does the author use language to convey his or her idea? Looking at that word choice. They didn't just use these words for no purpose. They really picked specific words for a reason. That is called word choice. So how did they use that language to convey their idea or their message? And lastly, what figurative language or imagery does the author use in the text? That's again going into the author's style. You might find similar or different figurative language or imagery. So again, each answer, you'll either put it in the center if it's a similarity, or you'll have one on each side as a difference. All right, that is your independent practice for the day. We've done everything. We've checked yesterday's work. We looked at 2 descriptions of a cell together, and that sets you into your independent practice, that Venn diagram with those guiding questions referencing the 2 descriptions of a cell. Good luck on that. I know you'll do great. Before I leave you today, I just wanted to suggest some reading and writing so that in case you're getting kind of bored of reading for 20 to 30 minutes a day and writing a reflective piece on it, here's something that you could do to spice it up. So if you're reading, I would suggest you choose another scientific process to write about. Today we read about how cells function, but maybe there's another scientific process that you're interested in. For example, photosynthesis, or the process of changing light into energy, blood circulation, the nervous system. It could be anything. So I would suggest reading up on one of those. And for your writing, after you've read a scientific process or about a scientific process, and you can use Britannica Kids or the Britannica School through Clever, describe the scientific process that you read about using figurative language and literary devices. So while you're reading it, it's probably going to be very scientific with a lot of specialized vocabulary and maybe really hard for someone to understand. So after you've read it, take that same information that you've learned and rewrite it. Add in some similes and metaphors, hyperboles to explain that process so that someone like me, who's not a science person, can understand it and can really picture it in their head. And because of how you compare it to other things or describe it. I'd love to see your work again, as usual. So definitely, please email me, especially your writings, to mscott5@rvaschools.net. I'll keep checking back on my email, and I can't wait to see your work. I'll see you all tomorrow.